let's get started. If you are brand new to these sessions, as Karen is, these are exactly 60 minutes. We finish exactly after 60 minutes because it's the weekend. And for me and my team, I'm in Portugal, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's why we finish at 5 o'clock UK time. We have May here from the Philippines. Welcome to you, May. So we have got people from all over the world, which is extraordinary and awesome. So today, what we do is we always have a theme to these sessions. If you're new, Karen, what we do is the main purpose of these 60 minutes is for me to answer questions about the effective pricing software. But I also have a theme as well. So typically it works like this. We have about 20 or 30 minutes where I'll show you something. Our theme today is aimed at building up a pricing model really from the ground up. 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll get into questions. Hi there, Isabel. Good to see you from Montreal. If you've got questions, then ask at any point in time in the comments box, the chat box, wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, whatever. But please put capital QQ in front and perhaps a question mark at the end as well, because as you can probably see already, we get lots of comments coming through, and comments are great. Please give comments, but also if it's a question, so it stands out at my end, just put a QQ in front. Okay, I recognise quite a few people here. I've already asked who's brand new to these sessions, but also it'd be great to know who are the effective pricing experts out there? Who are the stars? Let me know in the comments box if you're getting great results with the software. What sort of results are you getting? Just put that in the comments box just so I know who are the experts here, who are the real stars, and I'll give you a bit of a shout out in a bit. And whilst you're doing that, if you're just sharing your successes, your results, what I will do in the meantime is one of the things we always do on these our live sessions is to help make the world a better place. We always make a contribution through the amazing B1G1 organization and pick a project somewhere in the world. And what we do is make a contribution on your behalf to that project for each and every person live. So as a thank you for being here, what we will be doing, the chosen project for today's live session is to help people who have been subject to human trafficking, where, as you can perhaps read on the screen, there is an organization where people who have been subject to human trafficking can get relocated, but they can't call home sometimes, they can't access home. And so for each and every one of you here today live, we'll make a contribution to help these poor people make a call back home and reconnect with their family. Okay, so that's what we do. Every time we do a live session, we make a contribution on your behalf. So you are helping making the world a better place. Okay, let's, before we dive in, a few people. So I know Jessica is amazing with the software. She doesn't consider herself an expert, but definitely getting great results. But she then said, just got a 70% increase on a cleanup project yesterday using the software, which is awesome. And Jessica is doing some amazing stuff. So well done to you. Rennie in Cornwall has increased his prices across 19 quotes by 22.15%. So that's amazing, Rennie. Stacey here is a newbie from Wisconsin. So welcome to this session, Stacey. We have a few people like Lisa still setting things up. Okay, Lisa, if you have any questions, ask. So let's dive into today's content. If you've got questions, put that QQ in front of your comment, and we'll get onto questions in a short while. But first, let's talk about how do we build up a model from the ground up. And so we're going to dive into the software in a short while, but what I would suggest to you is that I'm going to talk about some of the planning things that you would want to do. And to make this practical, if you've never used the software before, you can price anything that you want. And depending on the plan that you've got, we've already created models for you for most of the most common services, like, for example, how to price bookkeeping. So whilst I could show you right now how to build a bookkeeping model from the ground up, my advice is use the ones that we've written for you and then edit, tweak them to make them work for you. Rather than reinvent the wheel, just edit the ones that we've created. So I'm going to do something a bit different today, and it's based on a session I did yesterday for people in the Value Pricing Academy. So yesterday I was teaching how might we value price, helping our clients set up with apps. So as you know, there are so many apps now in this world that we live in where we can help our clients, those apps that can help our clients become more efficient, apps that can help them manage their inventory, their stock, apps to help manage cash flow, to manage their employees like Expensify, employee expense claims, and so on. There are thousands of applications out there that very often plug into their cloud accounting systems like QBO, like Xero, and there are so many that there's an opportunity. It's confusing. It's really confusing for the business owners out there, and they probably don't even know this stuff exists that can streamline their internal financial systems. But you do. This is your world. So one of the things that you can do to add value to clients is recommend and help them set up certain apps like QuickBooks Time, which used to be T-Sheets I discovered the other day, like HubDoc, like Receipt Bank, like Expensify, Gusto, and many, many more. You could help them set these things up, which is valuable. And because it's valuable, you should charge for that. So how do you charge? How do you come up with a price for setting clients up with apps? And yesterday in my Pricing Academy, we went deep on that and we looked at how you might build up the value and so on. Today, we're going to look at how you might build a model up in the software for doing that. And I'm using that just to make it real and practical. But what I really want to do is show you how simple it is to create a model for pricing anything. And we're going to also illustrate a couple of challenges that you may come across that you might think and how you might get around those in the software. So what we'll do first is, let me think. The first thing I'll do is we're going to build a model together, but I've actually kind of started one already to save a bit of time. So if you're brand new, then perhaps have no idea what the software does. If I just switch across to the software now, then this is the homepage, and on the homepage you will see all the different pricing models that you've created. I have lots of models because I'm demonstrating all of the time, but I have one here at the bottom called App Setup. So it may be that I'm sat down with a client, I've explained how I can set them up with an app, and they want me to do exactly that. And so what I would do is, once the client's agreed they want to buy, if the only thing left to talk about is the price, what I would do is open up the software and I'd ask a series of questions. So this is a really simple one I've just created this afternoon. I might want to ask them, what would you like? What app is it that you're interested in? Oh, it's Expensify. Can you help me set up Expensify? So we could choose the app that they want setting up. We might give them some choices. So a choice we might ask is, now Expensify would integrate with your cloud accounting system. Would you like us to also integrate it into the system, yes or no? Which of course, as you know, would be adding some more value. It'll help them if we can integrate these things for them, which is, in this day and age, most of these apps integrate with QBO, Xero, whatever accounting system you're using. So they might say yes to that. The next question says, is actually a section, and I'm going to show you how to set these up, that says, is this app based on the number of employees? Now, Expensify is, and it may be that when you set your client up with Expensify, it might take you a bit longer, and there's more value if you're setting up for a client with 1,000 employees versus one with 5 employees. So we can factor that into the price. So if our client has, let's say 50 employees, then we could factor that into the price. It may be there's other fancy things the apps does, which I could say yes to. I'll come on to that later as we build this. And then what happens is, once you've asked your various questions, you can ask scope questions, which impact on the amount of work involved, but also you can give various choices like, would you like this as well? Do you want this extra thing? Would you like us to integrate it? Then what we do is we take the client to the page where they can see the different choices that you've created, different packages. And I'll come on to that in a second and talk a bit more about that. And ideally what will have happened is the client will have probably already told you before you get to this stage, before you start the pricing, which one they're interested in. And let's imagine they're interested in the premium. So we show them the price. The price is 12 payments of $188 for setting up this application if they want the premium version. And they either say yes or no. If they say yes, you've made a sale, which is great. If they say that's too expensive, then we can go back and we can change a few things. It may be that they decide not to have these additional things. It may be they decide they don't, on reflection, need to have it integrated. And so we could change the way they answer the questions, and the price changes accordingly. So that's a very quick run through of what you would do at the front end with the client, that you would ask them a series of questions, some questions to determine scope, some other choices. Then we would reveal the price, and we can reveal the price for different packages, different options. Think of it as a bronze, silver, gold, which is on this screen. Now, of course, once we've done this, there's other things we can do as well. We can use what's called behavior rewards. I'll talk about that another day. We can also do the upsell. So in other words, if the client says, yes, I want your premium service, setting me up and supporting me with Expensify, then when we hit the select button, we can now offer them upsells. So it's 12 payments of $125. But we might say, when we do the training and the education for you, what a lot of our clients like is just to also do create some workbooks for them to help with the training, so they've got them to constantly refer to. Would you like those? We normally charge $297 for those, but if you take those now, it's just $150. And as you can see, it only takes the monthly price from $125 to $138. This is called the upsell process. It's really powerful. You should always offer other things once the client makes the buying decision. Okay, let's now talk about some of the things that you want to think about when you build a model. And we're going to go behind the scenes in a short while. Before we do that, there's a few things you want to plan. So the first thing that I recommend that you do when you're thinking about pricing, building a pricing system, building a pricing model, is think about, well, what is it that you're selling? What is your app setup service going to consist of? What are you going to do for the client? And then what you also want to do is think about something which I call menu pricing, which is really powerful. It's about giving people choice. Think of it as the bronze, silver, gold. We have different packages to suit different types of clients. So that's where you start off your process. What is going to be the offering? So if we were looking at app setup, if I just switch back to here, I've just done a screenshot of something that I was talking about yesterday, is you might decide to give the client 3 choices. Doesn't have to be 3. In the software, you can build anything between 1 and 5 packages. It's entirely up to you. But 3 is very common. It's the bronze, silver, gold. There's some reasons behind why that works. There's some psychology. So let's imagine that you decide to create your bronze, silver, gold, and you decide that you have the cheap service, the bronze level, you decide to call an app setup service. That's where you set up an app for someone. In this case, it might be Expensify. And so what you might decide to do as part of that is you might set them up, configure their company settings, you might set up their preferences, templates, that sort of thing. So you'll just set them up with the application. It may be that the middle package, the middle option, is you might call that your app education. And that may be where you go a bit further, where once you've set it up, you might have, for example, a 30-day education program. It may be you have an easy onboarding program where over 30 days, you perhaps run some online meetings with the client. Perhaps you send them some videos, some other training resources as part of an onboarding process to help them get up and running and understand the software. And then what you might do is have a premium support option where, and the way that I've set this one up, because I want to illustrate a few things, is you might decide your premium support option gives them access to be able to email you at any point in time when they want help with that app. If they have a problem, they can email you. They get unlimited email support, telephone support. They get access to another training library. Perhaps you create a library of training videos on how to use the app. Very often the app providers create those videos and you can repurpose them and use them on perhaps your own YouTube channel. And it may well be that what you do is make your premium one where it becomes a monthly subscription and you include in that the software costs itself. So if you think about wholesale billing with QBO, for example, and many of the other apps do the same thing, is that you might get some benefits of buying the app on behalf of the client and then you build it into your costs. So it may be your premium one becomes a monthly recurring service. So that's step one. The first thing you want to do is, before you even open up the software, is think about, well, what is it you're selling? How might you structure the different options? So let's go with that. We're going to use this for our example. Second thing that I suggest you do before you dive into the software, second thing is start to think about what sort of prices would be the right sort of prices. Start to plan that a little bit. Now, some services like bookkeeping, cleanup work are extremely complicated, and so you might want to do some analysis by looking at what you've done in the past and what sort of prices come up. But if you're creating a brand new service, and by the way, if you use one of the templates I've built, like bookkeeping, we've already got some suggested prices in there. But let's say you're building your own up, and in this case, we've got app setup. And one of the things you want to start thinking about is, what would you like the prices? What sort of prices would be great prices? And one way of thinking about it, and I've got here I've changed the label slightly, but basic, core, advanced, bronze, silver, gold, whatever. Have a think about, and perhaps just jot down, play around with some numbers. What would be the minimum price that you would want from setting somebody up with a cloud accounting system? Sorry, an little app system. So if you were setting something up with Expensify, it might be that you would want to make it worth your while, at least $250. But ideally, you might want to get $350. And if you got $700 just to set them up, that might be an amazing price. You'd be really pleased with that, because perhaps you've done it for free in the past. Then if you build in some education, a 30-day training program, what would you want to get as a minimum? Perhaps $400, for example. But ideally, it would be nice if you got $550. And if you got $1,100, that would be awesome. If you were to offer a monthly recurring subscription, and you also then did let the client ring you, they wanted help whenever they wanted, what might you want there? And in that case, you might want at least £80 or $80 a month, plus, of course, the cost of the software itself, which I'm going to come on to that issue, because I know that's a big question going through people's mind. And the same with what might be the ideal price you'd like, and what would be your pump fist price, your amazing price, something that would be amazing if you got $200 a month recurring for setting up somebody with Expensify, for example. So have a think about the numbers that you would like, because that'll help you when you get to the testing phase. Okay, with that said, let's me go into the software itself. And what I'm going to do is, so I've showed you at the front end how you might do the pricing. And by the way, if you've got questions, remember, stick the questions in the comments box. Put QQ in front if you've got questions. I can see Sarah Kelly's asked a question. I will get to questions in about 15 minutes. So when you hit the cogwheel at the top, that takes you behind the scenes. This is the bit that you don't show your clients. This is where you set everything up. And if you go here, you might notice, those of you that know the software, there's something brand new here. The very last option is called Client Versions. We've just released this week some brand new features, some features that are really exciting. And we'll be doing some announcements next week. And just so you know, next Friday's topic will be around some of the most important new features. So if you notice something new, there'll be some training coming very soon, next week. Okay, but the main area you'll focus on most of the time is this model management on the top row. Model management is where you manage your pricing models, where you create them, where you might edit them, where you grab the ones that we've created for you. And there's a big button called Create New on the top right. Create New is where you can build a model from the ground up. As I said before, most of the time you will probably use one we've built for you and edit it and change it rather than reinventing the wheel. But there may be times where you're thinking, I'd love to create a pricing model for app setup or for training clients in using QBO. And so you can build your own models. Now, I'm not going to hit Create New. Yes, I will. I'll hit Create New just to show you the first screen. So when you hit Create New, you will give the model a name. Bookkeeping, app setup, whatever it might well be. You can choose a little icon, which goes in the menu on the left-hand side. There's a couple of other things you can set at this stage. And then let me just put, I'm just going to put test just for a second, just to fill it in. And then when you hit save and continue, what you now have on the left-hand side is the workflow. And it's just pulling things in. So on the left-hand side, you'll see it says questions, expressing price, pricing parameters, and so on. This is your workflow for building a model from the ground up. Now, to save a little bit of time, I'm going to come out of that because I started building one. I cheated. I started building one just a little bit early this afternoon, just to save a little bit of time. So I've got it down here as app setup demonstration. So I'm going to hit the edit button. So I set this up this afternoon. I just put in a little cogwheel icon because I thought that was quite cool for app setup. And if I go to save and continue, we then get the workflow. And thank you, Philip. Philip says, hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the training. And I would really appreciate that. That would be awesome. Philip, thank you for that. I know you say that quite regularly. Yeah, hit that like button if you're enjoying the training so far. We've got more to cover. We're not finished. We're only just getting started. Okay, so where do we get to? Yeah, what I would do is you can work through this in order. You can set up your questions first. You can set up each thing in turn. However, where I normally start, and it's entirely up to you, but I would normally go into packages. The packages where you set up those tables of ticks and crosses, where you decide what's in the different packages. Now, before you even go there, if you go to the one before that, this is where you can decide whether you want to offer one package, 3 packages, anything up to 5. There are 5 columns in here, and you can decide how many packages you're going to offer using the setting called display options. By default, when you start a new model, you'll find that the first and the last one are hidden, i.e. they're not being used. The other 3 will have show. That's saying that show means we're going to show the client those 3 options, the second, the third, and the fourth, the bronze, silver, and gold, if you like. If you wanted to, you could have a cut down light version. You could have at the other end of the spectrum a super premium. I'm not doing that for this particular demonstration, but it's there if you want it to. And we can also set up the names of our apps. So by default, it says light, entry, full, and premium. I'm going to change the entry to app, in this case, app setup. I'm going to change the full to, I think we called it app education. I forget exactly, you'll probably remember better than me. And the premium, I think we said we'd call that, I forget now, app support or full support. I forget what wording I used. So you can create the names rather than bronze, silver, gold. You can choose something more meaningful. I'm going to do just that one step for now. I'm going to hit save and continue. That takes us to the next stage of the workflow, which is the ticks and the crosses. And you can see now on this page, it's now put those names in: app setup, app education, app full support. And a few hours ago, I'd already started setting up the table just to save a bit of time. So in the app setup, we've got a holistic review and diagnostic report, configuration of your company settings and your company preferences. For the app education, a 30-day education program and an easy onboarding program. Let me just finish off. It's really easy to create your packages, what you will show the client when you get to the pricing page. So if I hit add component, and just to save some time, I'm going to do a cut and paste job. Okay, so we might give the client access to a full training library of videos, help sheets and whatever, and that's going to be excluded from our light setup and education. It's just for the full. So if I put save, you'll see we've got an extra line now appeared. I'm just going to add the next 2 in as well, and I will cut and paste just to save some time. So we might give premium access to unlimited email support. So I'll put Control V and paste that in, and let's just exclude those 3. Then I'll hit save. Finally, we will include the subscription to the software itself through wholesale billing. So add component. And what I'm going to do this time is, as well as excluding from these 3, rather than having a tick, I'm going to put the word free in there. There's a reason why you might want to do that, but you'll see at the bottom we've got free. Free, we include the software subscription for you when you buy the app full support, the premium version. There you go. It's as simple as that to create your packages, and that's where I would start. Okay, I've hit save and continue, and it's taken me to the last step. But But actually what I want to do now is go back to the start. Because now what I want to do is think about, so what questions might we ask? What questions might we ask the client to come up with the price? And so I'm going to give you just a few ideas, a few thoughts. So the first question I've already set up earlier. So I've got a section called About Your Needs. And question 1 is, which app do you want us to set you up with? You would just hit that add question to create a brand new question. I've already done this one, so I'll hit the edit button. So I decide that for question number 1 would be, which app do you want us to set you up with? And we can then choose a question type. And the most common 3 you'll use is either drop down, yes or no, or value. A yes or no is looking for a yes or no answer. A value is looking for a number, like how many bank accounts do you have? And a drop down enables us to give the client a series of options. So I've gone with drop down. And add simply means that we're going to add the price on to whatever came before, of which nothing at the moment. This is the first question. So I've created a table. And I've created a table with a number of different apps: QuickBooks Time, Bill.com, Pluto, HubDoc, Expensify. I could very easily add another one. So I could add, let me think of another app. You're probably well ahead of me here. I'm struggling to think of an app, so I'm going to make one up. Trello. You could set people up with Trello. And I might decide for that one, if they want Trello, I want to make it, that's a bit more complicated. That takes more time. I'm going to start my calculations at 500. And I'm going to hit the save button. And by the way, we can reorder those so that others still appears at the bottom. Okay, so I've just updated my table, the drop-down box that the client will see. Where do those numbers come from? Those numbers are based partly on that research you did, that planning you did, where you thought about, well, what sort of price do you want to get? You want to get at least 250. So I would use that as an idea, but you might want to flex it based on the complexity of certain apps. So I'm going to hit save. So another question we might ask is, we might want to give them a choice. We might want to give them the choice as to whether or not they want us to integrate it with their accounting system. So all I would do is give the question a name. So do you want us to integrate the app into your cloud accounting system? And in this particular case, this is going to be a yes or no. They're either going to say yes or no. So yes or no question. And then we want to think about, what will we do in terms of the calculation? If they say yes to that, we could increase the price by 10%. So if the first question was they want us to set up Trello, and that's 500, we might increase the price by 10%. Or we might add something on, so hence multiply and add. They're the 2 most common ones you would use. It's entirely up to you what you choose. I'm going to go with add in this case. And if they say yes to that, I'm going to add an extra $100 or £100 onto the price. If they say no, I won't add anything on. And then you can set a default. What's the default answer? I'm going to default it to yes, because most clients I know want me to do that. Hit the save button. There you go. That's the second question. It's as simple as that to create a question. And if you remember, I had those 2 questions in the demonstration I did earlier. Now what we might want to do is we might want to create a brand new section, which I'm going to do. Sections mean that you can break down the questions you asked into separate pages. So you might want to ask some questions about the app they need. You might want to then ask some questions about something else and move to another page when you sat down with the client. But creating sections does one other really important thing, which I want to share with you in this example. So perhaps you decide that, yes, you're setting up those apps you're using this model to set up one of a number of different apps, Expensify, HubDoc, Pluto, whatever. But some of those apps, the complexity of you setting them up depends on something else. It might depend on how many employees they've got. If they've got lots of employees, then it might take you a bit longer to set up Expensify or QuickBooks Time. And so you might want to build that in to the price if they want certain apps set up. So to do that, I'm going to do that as a separate question, a separate section of questions, and I'm going to call this does the app, I forget the wording I had earlier, I think I said is the app based on number of employees. So we'll use that. That's not a question. That's just I'm just using that in this case for the title for this page, this section of questions. And I'm going to tick something called isolate section. This is a really useful tick box, and you'll see why in a short while. But essentially what happens, I'll just hit the save button. Behind the scenes, the software works out the price by working through the questions one by one. So if question number 1 adds on 100 and question number 2 adds on another 100, we have 200 so far. If question 3 multiplies by 2, if they say yes, we multiply that where we've got to so far, the 100 plus 100, 200 by 2, and we get 400. But what if we only want to change the price and multiply by 2 of the previous section, the 100, not the first 100. That's where we isolate things. And we can isolate basically means it's a bit like putting parenthesis in an Excel formula. We isolate the calculation. You'll see in a short while why this is going to be really useful. So I've got this section called is the app based on number of employees. I'm going to add some questions. The first question I want to add is how many employees do you have? I know I've not spelled that right, never mind. And that's going to be a value question because we're looking for a number, how many employees? And what I'm going to do with that question is I'm going to, whatever the calculation ends up being, so it's going to be an amount per employee, I'm going to add that on to the previous question. And I might decide that it's going to be $2 per employee. So, you're not showing your screen yet. Thank you, Sarah. I'm not showing my screen, I forgot. So you didn't see my spelling mistake. I can correct that. So how many employees do you have? It's a value question. I'm adding it on, and I'm going to go with 2. That means what's going to happen if the client has 100 employees, we're going to add on $2 or £2 for each employee. It's going to add on an extra 200. If they have 1,000 employees, we're going to add 2,000 on. So that's why I've got 2 in there. And I'm going to leave the default as 0. The default answer is always 0. What I'm then going to do is I know that some of my apps can do some fancy stuff, some other options with employees. So I'm going to add another question, and I'm going to call this one, do you want the additional employee enhancements? Okay, I'm just making up a feature here because I want to illustrate something really powerful with the calculations that it does. And for this, it's going to be a yes, no. Do they want that yes or no? And if they do, we're going to multiply this time. We're going to multiply by 2 if they want that. If they don't want it, we're going to multiply by 1, which doesn't change the price. Okay, so we're going to double the price so rather than $2 per employee, we're going to make it $4 per employee if they want this extra thing. So I'll default that to yes. Let's save that. And I'm going to ask one final question, and you'll see why this is going to be really useful to you. This is not a question. This says activate this feature. Activate this feature, yes or no. And I'm going to do a multiply. And if the answer is yes, we're going to multiply by 1, which doesn't make any difference whatsoever. If the answer is no, we're going to multiply by 0. And we're going to default it to no. The answer is by default, we don't activate this feature. Okay, you're going to see how all this works now. I'm going to show you how we test the software and so on. So I'm going to do those questions. So we've got some general questions. We want to know what app do they want. It could be Expensify. Do they want us to integrate it? And then if it's one that's based on number of employees, we're going to do some other calculations. We're going to add something to our price based on the number of employees, and potentially we might want to double that from $2 per employee to $4 per employee if they want this extra feature. Okay, I'm hoping that's making sense. We will look at the math in a short while. Before I do that, let's just very quickly go through the other sections in the workflow. So when you're building an app, a model, expressing the price, you usually don't need to change anything in there. They're nice things to change, but you don't need to do those until you get a bit more advanced. But pricing parameters is important. This is where you decide now, how are you going to create the price for each of your bronze, silver, gold? And also you want to make sure that If we accidentally have a multiply by 0, it doesn't show the price to the client as 0. We want to make sure we never go below a minimum. So what you'd want to do is work through here, and you'll see that you can set for each of the bronze, silver, gold, minimums and maximums. And this is where you may refer back to this table here that you created when you were thinking things through. You never want the price to go below $250 for the basic. So we can sort that out really easily because we can put 250 in for the minimum price of app setup. So if for some reason your maths goes wrong, it will never come up with a number less than 250. Likewise, you might choose the next one, which I think it was 400, and the top one might be 960. I forget, I think it was 80 a month, 960 in total. So we can choose a minimum, which will never go below, and we choose a maximum. The next row is really important. It's called relative price multiplier. What happens is based on those questions, those calculations, that comes up with our price. Usually I would recommend that becomes the price of your bronze level app setup. And this number here, 1, multiplies by 1. So that becomes the price of app setup. But if you want your app education, where you do some extra things, if you want that to be, let's say, 60% higher price, we put 1.6 in that box. In other words, when it calculates the price, it's going to add on 60%, and that's the price of your middle option. And your top option, because that includes the software, because that includes ongoing support, we might want to make that much more expensive. And I'm going to put 3.77 just because that's what we put in this box here. Okay, so we can now decide how much we raise the price of our middle and top options, our other packages. And the final thing on this page that I want to show you is we can also choose the period that we spread it over. And I want to illustrate something really powerful here. So when we've got app setup, it's a one-off service. We're going to set them up with the app and that's it. And so we'll have a price for that, a total price, which might be $250 upwards will be the total price. But for some services, they might pay us over a period of time, and we express the price over a period of time. For example, bookkeeping, you wouldn't tell them the annual cost of bookkeeping. You'd be better off telling the monthly price and showing the monthly price. And in the same way, although our premium is 3.77 almost 4 times the price, we're going to let them pay for it monthly because it's going to include the monthly subscription and it's a recurring revenue stream. So we're going to make that 12. In other words, what will happen is it'll divide the price by 12 because it's going to show it as a monthly figure, not a total. And that's now set up our packages. So let me hit save and continue. That then takes us on to the packages. We've dealt with that, that's set up. Then we can set up behavior rewards. I don't want to go into that today because that's an advanced feature. We can set up the enhancements, the upsell. We'll look at that another time. Finally, we have review. The review stage is where you can play with the maths and see how it works out. And so let's have a look at this. Let's go with Expensify. This is not this is behind the scenes. To save you going into the front end where we started, you can quickly see how the maths is working before you finalize it. So let's say we have Expensify and we've got a client that might say yes. If I hit the calculate button, what it's going to do is going to work out and show you how the math is building up. So it's $300 because they've chosen Expensify. The next column says $400 because it's increasing the price by $100 because they want the integration. And then we've not filled in the other section, so it's not adding anything. So that means we've got $400. And below that, we can see that would be app setup, one payment of $400. If they want the app education, it increases 60%. So that would reveal a price of $640. And if they wanted the full support, it would actually show 12 payments of $125. It would be a lower number because we're spreading over 12 months. 12 lots of 125 as opposed to 400 or 640. The bottom of this table lets you see how the prices will be revealed if you ran this in front of the client. But let's go back to here, because one of the things that we've got is this second section. Is the app based on number of employees? And so let's say the app is based on, let's say it's Expensify, and let's say the client has 50 employees. So I'm going to put 50 in there. And let's say that, yes, they want the additional employee enhancements. And I'm then going to hit the calculate button. So now what it's doing is we've got our 300 for Expensify. We've added on $100 because that's what we're putting in, what we want if we do the integrations. Now we've said that we're going to, if it's an app that takes more effort and there's more value if they've got employees, we're going to go for $2 per employee. Well, with 50 times 2 is 100. You can see it's adding on 100. It's going from 100 to 500. The next one multiplies and doubles that $2 per employee to $4 per employee, adds another 100, takes us to $600. But the end result is $400. It's gone back to the 400. Why? Because we've not actually activated this one. So if we're in front of the client, if they had 50 employees, we would want to make sure we hit this. If I just hit the calculate button, now we have our $600 price. But let me just explain a couple more things. So this question here, do you want additional employees? If they say yes, it's a multiplier. It doubles the price. But it only doubles the price of the number before. So they've got 50 employees. 50 employees, it works out, times $2 is $100. The next question is going to double that to $200. And that's because we've isolated that section. If we didn't isolate the section, what happens is the math is in the order of the questions. In other words, it would go $300 plus 100 for our integration, plus another 100 for the 50 employees is 500. And then normally that would double to 1,000 when we multiply the price. But because we've made it a separate section, we've effectively put a parenthesis around here. What it's also done is this activate this feature is just a neat little override that you can decide whether you want to add whatever comes out of these two questions onto your price. So by default, it's no, which means if I hit calculate, that even if you accidentally put something into these two boxes, the price will be the $300 plus the $100 for integration, and that's it. It will only add on something more for number of employees if you then, in front of the client, use a little slider bar to turn no to yes to activate the feature. When you do that, it'll factor in then the price, the extra cost, the price of additional employees. So I wanted to show you that because that's what isolate sections does. It's a more advanced feature, but it gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to coming up with your pricing models. Now, I'm conscious that we've spent a bit more time than I normally do, and there's probably questions, but I do want to deal with a couple of final things that I know that we'll have questions over because we're talking about app setup. And one of the challenges with this model, if you were to create this model, you will have a little bit of a challenge because we've got software costs. So probably the question going through your mind right now is, yes, but Mark, when I build this, I want to make sure I factor in the cost of the software if I'm doing wholesale billing. And what if the cost of software is different, whether it's QuickBooks Time, HubDoc, Receipt Bank, Pluto, Gusto, whatever. So let me give you a few thoughts on costs, on software costs. And I'm just going to go back to show you a couple of things. And if I'm just going to make this bigger for you on the screen. So here we go. One of the things people do get concerned about is costs, building in the costs. And this only applies if you're building a model where you have got costs. And this is why I've chosen app setup, because it may be if you're using wholesale billing, you're going to have to pay the software company. And I know there's lots of questions around that. And I want to illustrate something to hopefully put your mind at ease. Imagine you have two clients, Bob and Bill. Bob wants you to set up Receipt Bank for them. And you know that based on Bob, it's going to, and these numbers are made up, by the way, they're just purely for illustrations. You know that if you set up Receipt Bank for Bob and you use wholesale billing, it's going to cost you £100 per month for the software for Bob's business. As you talk to Bob about the benefits and you build up the value of Receipt Bank, you discover that Bob is willing, they see the value of A, Receipt Bank, and B, the support that you're going to give, the extra value you create through training him, setting it up, making his life easy. He sees the value. He's willing to pay you $200 a month for Receipt Bank and all of the support that you'll give. And so what would your price be? Well, your price would probably be $200. And therefore you make $100 profit per month because you will collect $200 from Bob and you'll then pay out $100 a month for Receipt Bank. And provided that you're happy with the $100 a month for the effort that you put in, the training, the support, the education, if you're happy and Bob's happy, then $200 is a great price because Bob's getting something he's willing to pay for. He sees the value in Receipt Bank plus your support, and you're happy with $100 a month for giving support to Bob. Let's imagine you have another client. You have Bill. Bill actually sees some value in you setting up HubDoc for him. Now, HubDoc, it turns out for Bill, is half the cost. It's $50. When you have the conversation with Bill and you build up the value of HubDoc, you build up the value of the extra support that you will give, the training, the education, it turns out that Bill sees value in you setting up and him having HubDoc in place at $200 a month. So the question then becomes, what price do you charge Bill? What price do you charge Bill? Do you charge Bill $200 a month because he values that? Or do you charge him less than Bob because your costs are less? Because HubDoc, if you've got wholesale billing, HubDoc is a cheaper piece of software. So you could charge either $150 or $200 and therefore make a profit of $100 like with Bob or $150. If your answer to this is I would charge Bill less, I would charge him $150 and still make $100 in profit. That's because you are in the old-fashioned cost-plus mindset, which is what hourly rates and time-based billing is, of saying we look at our costs and we add something on for our hoped-for profit. If our costs are less, we charge less. Value pricing is where we focus on the value. If the client sees more value, if we create more value, if we communicate more value, we price based on the value. And therefore, if you have the mindset of value pricing, you would still charge Bill $200 because he sees value of $200 and you would make more profit. So if you have the value pricing mindset and you bill each of Bob and Bill $200, here's the question I'll pose. What's the relevance of costs? You see, when we're value pricing, costs are irrelevant. I know we get hung up on costs because we're accountants, but we have to start moving away from cost plus thinking and think about value to the client. So with that said, and hopefully that's kind of helped you a little bit there, obviously you still want to make sure you make a profit on the deal. And one of the things that you might be thinking about is if you're building a model like App Setup, if all of those software tools that you might offer have similar costs, one might be $15 a month, one might be $20 a month, the price shouldn't matter because if you're billing the client $100, $200, the costs don't matter. If you've built a model and you've built value with the support you create, with the way you communicate that value and the client sees that value, the price becomes less important and therefore it's not something to worry about so much. But if you do have certain apps which are very expensive, my advice would be, in that case, build a separate model. I showed you how to build a model and give you some thinking around some of the things to think about, like thinking about external costs, thinking about isolate sections. But if you end up finding that you are doing a lot of setting up of apps with people and you're doing a lot of, for example, Receipt Bank integrations and so on, then just build a separate model. You can do that in the software really easily. You can build one model, you can clone it, you can tweak it, you can change the costs. Right, we've gone on longer than I normally do for these sessions, so I am going to now dive straight into questions. So I have not been looking at the chat box, so bear with me a second. I can see that Hirschko says, love your videos. Thank you for that. Someone here from Nigeria. Hi there. Is that Babajid, if I pronounce that right? Let me look for, in fact, I'm going to scroll back a bit. Someone did ask a question, definitely earlier. I saw it. Where was it? I think it was early on. Forgive me. I'll get there soon. Remember, stick QQ in front. That way it'll jump out at me. Where was it? Who asked the first question? I'm going to get there soon. It was Sarah Kelly. Hi there, Sarah. Quite a long one here. Sarah said, are there any future plans to be able to download proposals to a format other than PDF, for instance, Word or Google Docs? I found a couple of instances when I would like to add the contents of the proposal, such as the charts, into other documents, and having a PDF alternative would be helpful. The answer is no, and I don't, if my developers are still here, they might give the technical reason. The reason why you can't download into tools like Word is essentially because Microsoft charge a huge price for the ability to export into Word. And if I did that, if we allowed that functionality, we would have to significantly increase the price of the software. So that's why we make them available as PDFs. And once they're in PDFs, there are tools that are PDF editors. You can still do editing with PDFs. And that's also why we built in a lot of flexibility with the way you can build your proposals inside the software. But if there's a more technical answer than that from my developers, then please feel free to type into the comments box for Sarah. She's on Facebook, by the way. What other questions have we got? I think Rennie was the next question. So Rennie says, we have completed a virtual finance director brochure. Not sure what to use as a starting point in the questions in effective pricing to get a pricing model. Any suggestions? Great question, Rennie. And it may be one that I think I need to give you a better answer than one I will give here. I need to think about it. So Rennie, I know you're in the Value Pricing Academy. My advice is cut and paste that question, put it into the Value Pricing Academy Facebook group, tag me, and I'll give it some thought over the next few days. But let me just give some general thoughts. So what you want to do is when you're creating a model, the first question is usually arguably the most important question, because the first question starts all the math. So in the case of the one I just built, it was, what app would you like me to set you up with? If you were pricing bookkeeping, probably the single most important factor is how many transactions do they have per month. If you were pricing annual financial statements, then probably the single biggest thing that impacts on the how big a price would be is how big is the business. If it's a 10 million turnover business, you would probably have a higher price for annual financial statements than if they just turn over 100,000. So your first question is usually your first question is what's the most important scope question. And that's particularly the case when it's a compliance service where it's all about scope. Bookkeeping is about number of transactions. Financial statements about how big the business is. If it's tax returns, it might be the different sources of income, for example, or how many pages of the tax return you have to complete. But sometimes it may be something else. It may be that your first question is more about their willingness to pay. Why do they need this? What's the reason for it? So if we were thinking about, let's say, business advisory, one of the things we could do, it might be, or let's say cash flow forecast. A cash flow forecast, if somebody wants a cash flow forecast doing because they're looking to raise $1 million in loans, then there's a huge amount of value in doing a cash flow forecast to help someone get $1 million in finance. If somebody wants a cash flow forecast just because they're mildly curious, there's less value. There may not be any difference in the amount of work you have to do, but there's a big difference in the amount of value that someone gets. And so the other thing to consider with the first question, Rennie, and maybe more important in the case of a virtual finance director or virtual CFO if you're in the US, it may be that your first question might be more geared towards what's the biggest indicator of the value they'll get from what I'm doing. Could be another way of thinking about what that first question's going to be. So Rennie, it was a great question, and I'd like to give you some more thought on that very specifically. So if that's okay, if you to put that into the Facebook group and tag me, then I will I'll answer that in a bit more detail and think specifically about VFD. Okay, a few people said they don't see my screen, but that's because I made a mistake earlier. So apologies for that. I think we fixed it. Any more questions? Linda Barney. How do you bring multiple models into one proposal? You can't do that, and at least not at the moment. It's something that is on the list of things that we might build at a future date. However, I don't think that's necessary because one of the things that I strongly recommend is that when you build a pricing model, you should keep the main things you do, the core services, separate. An example I often give is let's say, bookkeeping and payroll. If a client wants bookkeeping and payroll, then they're both different services. They have different scope factors. Bookkeeping would be based on things like how many transactions a month. Payroll is on how many employees do you have? How frequently? Is it a weekly wage? Is it a monthly salary? There's different scope factors for bookkeeping and payroll. There's also different options you might give people. And so much better, if a client wants both, then what you would do is talk about the most important one. You might say, let's price your payroll first. And you'd go through your process of building up the value. And then you'd open up the software and you'd give a price for the the bookkeeping. And when the client says yes to that, then you can say, now let's look at the payroll. Let's talk about how we can help you with payroll, how we add value, what we do, the different options, and then let's look at the price of that. And so you would create two different prices with two different models. And at the end of each one, when you've done it in the software, you can finalize it and then you can produce the proposal, and you'll have a bookkeeping proposal, you'll have a payroll proposal. And that means what you can do as well is when you create your proposal templates in the software, you might have slightly different wording. You might have some subtle differences between a bookkeeping proposal, some of the words and the images, to a payroll proposal. You could build them into one. The problem with building them into one model is that it's better to price things separately and build up the value separately. But if you did build them into one model, you can do that, but you will end up with a lot of questions. You'll have all the questions about bookkeeping, you'll have all the questions about payroll, and it could get quite complicated. You can simplify some of the complication with the calculations, the math, by perhaps having some isolated sections. So you could ask questions about bookkeeping, and then you could create a brand new section, like I showed you earlier, where you could then say, would you like our payroll? And you can then isolate that section and do the calculations in isolation. And then in that case, Linda, in that particular case, if you were to use a separate isolated section, then you could create one price, one quote, and then you could push it out to one proposal. Okay, that's how you do it. So Babajid, if that's pronounced right, says, can I give a sample template for pricing a completed outsourced finance function? I can't because I've not built that, but I know that Rennie's doing that, and it's the sort of thing I do for people in the Value Pricing Academy. So I don't have one specifically for virtual finance. It's something I will be doing at some point in the future, but when I do, it'll be for people in the Value Pricing Academy. If I create a model for that, I'll put it in the software. Jessica's just answered the question from somebody earlier about PDF software. So using Nitro Pro. So hopefully that helps. We have 1 minute left, probably time for one more quick question, but I don't know if we've got one or not. We have a few, I think. Okay, I'll do them in order. Nancy, I think, was the next question. Could we at some point have an actual practice session showing how the software is used with a fictional client? Nancy, one of the things, I don't know if you're in the Value Pricing Academy or not, but one of the things we have is study groups. In some of the study groups, they have done little role plays, and I know people have said that's really valuable. I forget whose study group that is, but if you are in the Value Pricing Academy, then if that's of interest in you being part of a study group and working with a group of other people in the academy to do some role plays and stuff, email Sarah and she can help you with that, Nancy. I can't remember if you're in the academy or not. If not, I did do a session a few months back about how do you do a price in front of the client. It's on YouTube somewhere, where I spent the first 20, 30 minutes of the meeting going through the process, the front end. So if Sarah perhaps can dig out the link to that video, we can put it in the comments box at some point. Nothing to do with the effective pricing, but the question, what software do I use? Do I use for these YouTube videos? I use a whole bunch of different software for doing what I'm doing right now. I'm using Ecamm, I'm using Restream, I'm using Stream Deck, a whole bunch of stuff. Those of you who are in my online live academy know I teach you how to be more professional when you're communicating to clients, and I go through all the software and tech on that. So it's outside the scope of today's session, but if you ever want to join the online live academy, that's the sort of things I teach. You might want to make notes. Those of you that asked about PDF files and stuff, Tom is one of the software, the software developer, owns the company, and he kindly has put some comments in there, just drawing your attention to it. It's in YouTube, but if you're in Facebook, you can see some other apps. And I think, Nancy, that's similar to your earlier question. So joining a study group if you're in my pricing academy is probably the best thing to do. Okay, I think that's all the questions, and we are 1 minute over. So thank you for coming along. As Philip kindly said earlier, if you've enjoyed this and found something valuable, give it the thumbs up, please, to let me know. Have an amazing weekend, and I may see some of you next week. I have a few live sessions next week. If you're in my academy, the Online Live Academy or the Value Price Academy, Bookkeepers Pricing Academy. If you're not in those academies, my next live session is next Friday, same time, same place. Next week is special because I'm going to be talking to you about a more advanced thing. We're going to look at how you can create models for your clients and how you can then charge your clients and earn fees from helping your clients with their pricing. And I'm going to talk you through some brand new functionality in the software. So you're going to find out what's new that's literally this week, just gone live, and I'll be teaching it for the first time next week. So if you're curious about that, if you want to know how you could perhaps use the software with your clients to help them price, because we have a lot of, maybe you've got a lawyer, for example, who knows nothing about pricing. You could help them with pricing and give them access to software to price legal services. You'll find out all about that next Friday. Thank you so much for coming along. I will have a great weekend. I will see you soon. Goodbye for now.